This time I call the meeting to order at 6:38 p.m. Thank you everyone for coming in for our 5th Customer Advisory Committee meeting on this very stormy night. Thank you diehards for coming out to see us, and thank you staff for braving the elements as well.
So let's go through the agenda and get a sense of what we're doing tonight. Tonight's going to be a really interesting meeting. So we'll have a lot of good activity. So the primary purpose for tonight is to go back through the 21 spending and funding alternatives that you took a first look at the last meeting, and to narrow those down to your top 4. So what we'll be doing as part of that is Habib Isaac, who was with us last time, will be going through some background information that he covered last time, but also just to bring us all back up to date on the spending and funding options and some key considerations to think about. And then you will be splitting up into some smaller groups and having all of the information that you need on computers and identifying your top 4 and identifying the group's top 4. So that's the primary purpose of tonight. That will go to our next meeting on March 19th, where you will then narrow it down to the top 2. And those 2, as you'll recall, will be going for research. So we'll be doing research after that meeting. So that's the plan tonight. And we did want to wait, just because of the weather, to allow others to appear. So we may have a few more that still arrive, but we will just keep going.
Thank you, Laura. At this time, are there any members of the public that would like to make any comments on items that are not on the agenda? I don't see anyone for public comment, so I'll close the public comment period at 6:40. The next item is approval of the minutes of the February 5th, 2019 CAC meeting, number 4. Do I have a motion to approve the meeting and minutes? Thank you. I can't see your last name. Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mike. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any nay? Motion carries. Missy, if you could take on the next item, please.
Can everyone hear me? All right, good evening, everyone. I am going to go over the same slides that I've gone over in the past, but just to kind of reiterate where we are and where we are going, just in case you forgot. So here's our project overview, and we are moving along very nicely. We are at workshop number 5. That's the shaded easel. Now the orange boxes represent, what we've done in the past, and that's kind of highlighted in the first four workshops, including the orientation. And then the next box that appears is the blue boxes, and that's kind of where we are tonight. So at the last meeting, we reviewed the 21 spending and funding alternatives. And then tonight we'll, as Laura said, go over those again, and hopefully we can narrow those down. And then where we are going, at the next workshop, we'll have our market research Godby research. They'll be here and they'll kind of give you an overview on what is market research and what they plan to do. And then workshop 7, we'll be reviewing those results and then also identifying the top alternatives again and kind of moving forward with the implementation plan. And then just the gray boxes there represent items we've already completed, and then the funding strategy and rate analysis box is kind of where we are right now. And then we plan to, after that, do our phasing plan and implementation plan. And so now I'd like to pass it off to Habib Isaac with Raftellus, and he will give an overview of the funding and spending alternatives.
Thank you, Missy. Thank you so much. I traveled quite a bit, and when I'm from Southern California, it was raining. I came up here, last time it was raining. I went back home, it was raining. I went to Florida, it was raining, but it was sunny in California. I came back, it was raining. I think I'm the rain king, so that's what I'm going to go with. I'm going to go a quick summary on what we talked about last time, very brief, and then talk about the activity we're going to do and the models that I incorporated and how those work. So there's three primary funding options. Go ahead. We got the pre-fund that starts in 2020, and then that's through 2030. Then the next one, we have PAYGO, which is not using any other alternative option. Next one is incorporation of debt. So all funding options, as I mentioned last time, includes PAYGO. Every single one, you're going to be funding some of this project with rates and revenue coming on an annual basis. So every single one is going to have a PAYGO option, and that's reflective of this puzzle piece. So the variations that we have is no pre-funding, no debt, which essentially is 100% PAYGO. The next one is pre-funding, where we're going to start ramping up some revenue before the project spending actually starts. And then the next one was, let's not do pre-funding. We're not going to want to change our revenue, have any revenue adjustments until the cost is actually incurred. Once that cost comes online, then we start paying. But we would use debt to mitigate that initial impact. And then the last one is, let's use all the funding options available to mitigate any impacts as much as possible. So that's what we went through last time. And as I mentioned, all the different spending options has PAYGO as a component. And then as we select one or the other or both, that generated 21 alternatives to the 7 spending options. And again, this is what we went through last time. So some key considerations to think about when you break down into your activities. So one is the annual average revenue increase. That's something that I showed on those charts. It showed how much on average the revenue adjustments would go up. And then I also had it broken up by every single decade. Another thing that I showed is, our adjustments, or one thing to consider, are adjustments smooth and consistent? That's typically what your ideal situation is. You don't want to see a lot of spikes in your revenue needs. You want to make it smooth, consistent, and able to absorb, be palatable to customers. Another thing, if it does fluctuate, by how much and to what extent for the different alternatives, so that could be a differentiator as to why you select one scenario, one alternative versus another. And then, are there any spikes in the revenue needs? One thing that I showed you last time was there were some that I actually put notes where there was a specific year where the revenue increased substantially, even though the average for that decade seemed pretty like 6% or 7%, but there might have been one year where it was a 30% increase. Because that was in the background, I brought that to the forefront as part of the notes in that particular alternative. When you think about pre-funding, there's a couple things to consider. It's dedicated revenue that's put aside in preparation for the project. So this, when you pre-fund, those funds aren't going to be used for any other purpose. And then whatever is put into that dedicated fund or separate reserve, it's also accumulating some level of reinvestment back, some interest earnings. Another thing, besides actual dollars set aside, slowly increasing revenue from 2020 through 2029 also reduces the increase that you have to do later on. So think about it. If you're looking at how much of a revenue adjustment we have to do, say in 2040, if you're slowly already building up revenue in this first decade, then the percent increase is going to be a little bit less compared to not doing anything from today and then having to ratchet up pretty quick. And then any built up of funding may also be leveraged as a reserve or matching funds to obtain low interest rate loans. So whenever you build up those reserves, it doesn't mean like if you have 15 million in pre-funding or 30 million in pre-funding, it doesn't mean you have to use those funds in that first year. You might choose when to let those funds loose in specific years that make the most sense. Another thing is when you're looking at low interest loans, things of that sort, if you have reserves on hand to show matching dollars, then it could provide some additional benefit to secure certain loans. And then lastly, adjustments today pay dividends throughout the project. So even though I was looking at how much money could be set aside in that first decade, if you do a revenue adjustment above baseline today, that revenue adjustment is actually generating revenue throughout the entire project term, every single year, because it's compounded every year. So that revenue doesn't just happen for the 10 years, it's continuing to generate revenue from that year when it happens all the way throughout the planning period. Lastly, when you think about debt, this is where it really comes into who should bear the most burden of the facility cost. One thing is, one reason to use debt that it spreads costs over the useful life of facilities. If you're gonna fund mainline replacement, those main lines are going to last another 50, 70, 100 years. So spreading that cost over amortization schedule of 30 years makes more sense in terms of correlating it to the useful life of that improvement. Also, this is where it gets into intergenerational equity. Does it make sense to pre-fund everything today or pay-go everything today with the current ratepayers that exist today, even though you're going to have people that sell their homes, new people come into the area from other areas, or you might have a little bit of infill growth and new development occurring. In that case, then you're just paying your pro rata share of the debt during the time period that you are a customer of the district. And then those that are customers in the future will pay their fair share when they come online. So that assists with intergenerational equity. And then lastly, the other thing with debt that you have to take into account is that it does cause the total project cost to increase. And that increase in cost is the total amount of interest you end up paying. Just like your home, if you buy it for $400,000, $500,000, that's the purchase price, but when you amortize it over the bank loan, you actually end up paying more than that once you pay all your interest payments, all your scheduled mortgage payments. So those are things to consider, and there's going to be a few. Myself, I have my colleague here, she's a manager with Artelis, Andrea Bowling, and Roger, as well as Andrew. We're all going to be at different tables, and you can ask us questions, and also we can bring up other key considerations when it comes to spending, things of that sort. So let me go into the activity a little bit of what we're going to be doing. So every single model that is on the computer, we have it where it has this window that pops up that has all the alternatives identified, and they're labeled similar to that exhibit that was shown last time, and it's all in the correct numbering sequence that was incorrect last time from what was handed out. So we have that. You could highlight any scenario that you wish, and you hit load. And then when you do that, you're going to see that information come to the forefront. Go ahead. And then another thing that we have available, which we're also going to have this in paper form, but if you determine what are your top 4 as a group that you like the best after going through them all and discussing those options with your table facilitator and amongst each other, then we're going to have you save the 4 preferred alternatives by first listing your group color and then identifying what reference number is. Is it 1? Is it 2.1? Is it 4.2 of the 21 alternatives? And when you do that and you hit save, then it ends up being, it populates at the bottom of this list. So then we're going to know which 4 you select, but you're also going to identify it on the paper handouts as well. So when you do that, this is the graphic interface that's going to show up. When you select a scenario, right now this one is 4.1. You'll see the title and it will show you that this is no pre-funding, no debt. And when you do that, then you're going to show on the left side the spending options, or I should say the spending metrics that's associated with this alternative. You're going to have the total project cost in 2018 dollars. You're going to have the average annual spending, and then you're going to have the total projected cost after inflation. It's also going to then show you what is the relative risk of the mainline improvements. And then on the right side, you're going to have the funding options when it's going to identify, is there any debt? What percent of debt? If there is, how much in financing costs are you going to incur? That ends up being an additional cost to the project. And then the annual average revenue adjustment each and every year. And then as a picture, you're going to see this dollar sign change as well. Right now, because of the selection, where it's no pre-funding, no debt, that means it's 100% pay-go. So that's what's reflected in this dollar broken up into that segment. So then when you select a different scenario, this one would have pre-funding, debt, and pay-go, then you're going to see the dollar sign change. So you have segments related to how it's going to be funded that relates to that option. And then it's also going to show how much in dollars is pre-funded. Okay? And then separate from that, you're also going to have the chart that we showed you of each decade. What is the average annual revenue adjustment? And then the red trend line is the average over all the decades, over the 50 years. So you're going to also have this information as well. And for the first 10 years, we're still also going to show you what is the average monthly impact every single year to your typical customer. That's what we showed last time as well. So that information is going to be for every single alternative on these computers. And then you're going to work with us, and I believe we have about 55 minutes to go through this activity.
So you'll look at your name tag, you're going to see a dot, a colored dot. And that corresponds to the table that you now get to go to. So if you have materials that you brought, I know Ray brought materials on an iPad, so if you had anything you brought that you want to reference, go ahead and bring that with you. But we are going to now head back to the tables, and then I'll explain what we're doing back there. So let's go through the table group instructions. And so you will need a spokesperson after this activity who will share what you've talked about at your table with the rest of the group. And so that person would be the person whose birthday is closest to today in days, not in years. So who at your table has a birthday closest to today, just in date, not in years? Okay, now let's keep going and get familiar with the handouts that you have. So at your table, you will see, you each have a copy of the 11 by 17 sheet that shows all of the 21 alternatives. And actually, they really are more 7 alternatives with various variations. So that you have that to reference. Also, the key considerations that Habib just went through is a dark blue page, and you'll see each of you have that. And then you will also see, if you flip over your table group instructions, you'll see that you have a voting matrix. And this is for you, so why don't you take a moment, just write your name at the top of that. That way you'll make sure you keep yours. Okay, so next steps. What you'll do is, using the computer, as was described above, you will go through each of the spending options. You'll be able to look at those. You can chat about them in your table group, and you'll identify yourself, I think that's one definitely that I want in my top 4. Or, no, I don't think that's one I want in my top 4. And so the voting matrix is for you to use just to jot down your thoughts, your initial thoughts. At the end of 50 minutes, you will then narrow it down to your top 4 alternatives, and you'll be given a strip of 4 dots, and you will then take those dots and use them to vote for those alternatives on your table grid that's up on the wall near you. So this matches what you see on your voting worksheet. So let's make sure that we just know what that is, and that also matches your 11 by 17, but the 11 by 17 has more information. So it shows the alternative number. It shows the title for it, such as no pre-funding, no debt, or pre-funding, no debt, etc. It shows the cost in 2018 dollars in millions is on your sheet. It shows the annual spending that equates to. So for example, the current baseline, this is what the district does every year, is $2 million a year. And the percent of the system that would be replaced if that were the alternative that you chose over 50 years, by the end of 50 years in 2080, that would be 18%. So that's what you have on this sheet, and that's what's up here. So we just wanted you to be familiar with what that is. And then you'll see you have much more information on the 11 by 17 also. Habib, did you have something to add?
Yes, one other thing, just to stay familiar with everything we showed you, especially like those puzzle pieces that were easy to identify, that's also a visual on the screen. So as you change to different scenarios, it will show you what puzzle pieces are included in that option to remind you back to what we presented last time.
So this is your time now to go through each of these alternatives, talk about them at your table. Say hi to your table facilitator. So table facilitators, be sure to introduce yourself to your group. They're there to help you in any way that you would like. Also, in addition to your table facilitator, you have subject matter experts. We have Habib here, we have Andrew here, we have Andrea here. And so if you have Habib's over here, but if that table needs to talk to Habib, Andrew and Habib will switch, etc. So,
Sorry,
and your facilitator can help you in that way.
I drafted my team. I'm good.
Okay, so let's get started. And your table facilitator will be watching the time and helping you in that way. And if you have questions, go ahead and ask and we'll get those answered. So you have 50 minutes to go through all 21 and come up with what you think.
So if you wouldn't mind, let me just kind of go through one whole picture.
When you tell them you got to raise their rates, they don't understand. As long as the faucet's working, the water is coming out. They don't comprehend how old this is and how it can fail.
My feeling is no pre-funding, no debt. That's a heck of an increase. That first couple of years. How's the public going to buy that?
It seems important that depending on when the bill is going to double, or if it triples in 10 years, that I think ratepayers would be pretty unhappy that they're taking on that big of a slice of the debt in the first 10 years.
Are the things that would sink us the fastest. They're no younger than anything else. So we're pre-funding. We already know that we have repair money coming in, our baseline, and kind of part of what the pre-funding is being talked to us about is.
And we're counting on some debt to lessen the initial pre-funding.
If you look at the percentage increases, they're slightly less.
Yeah.
But the overall average is more.
Firstly, our table was interested in exploring the cumulative costs. That would include this project cost as well as a typical annual rate increase that's just like standard as part of the system. So we discussed maybe being able to view that rather than a portion of the project, but cumulatively. We all sort of agreed that using debt, bond financing for this project would be beneficial. That was kind of a consensus that we had. And so I think our votes probably reflect that sentiment, that we kind of all gravitated towards those that contained some sort of debt component. Do you guys remember? Got it. So understanding how this percentage equates to actual dollars. And then our group also was really interested in seeing the Driving the Cadillac plan to see a little bit more information about what that scenario might mean if we just kind of like go all in and say we want to have the best we can buy. That's where we landed.
And would you go through just show us where your dots are, the blue dots, and
Sure.
the alternatives that those are under?
Ours really sort of landed in the last half of the scenarios. We liked pre-funding and debt, so we chose a lot of the 0.4s. We got 5.4, 6.4, and then the Cadillac plan of 7.4 was another favorite for us.
Okay, thank you.
We went around the table and we quickly determined that we are a big fan of pre-funding. And so that eliminated a number of alternatives because we just focused on the ones that were already included pre-funding. We went around the table and I think we did a great job. I think everybody felt really heard at our group. And we were pretty close. We also had Bren was part of our group, so he was of the younger generation, which was great because some of us are older, and it was nice to get a good spectrum and get feedback across the board for other generations. Where we 4.2 was discussed, where we focused. I don't know if you want me to go through each one.
You can come over and do it on the master if you'd like.
Okay.
Your dots have been translated over here.
Okay. What I will say is 5.4, Suzanne made a good comment. She liked 5.4, and one of the percentages, a few decades later, there was a 2.8%, and we're hoping to get it maybe up in the 3-point range so that we can lower the 5.5% in the first rate increase to kind of even it out a little bit better. So going over here, so again, we're the red dots. So we did, one person voted for 4.2. The majority was for 4.4 for pre-funding with debt. And that would give us 59% of the main water replaced. And then the other end of the spectrum that got the most votes was 5.4, pre-funding with debt, and that would get us at 72% of the main water be replaced. And then the others that were at 3 was 5.2, pre-funding, no debt. That would also get us a 7.2, and that was a good one because then we won't be carrying on debt, and yet we'd get the same number of water main replaced at 72%. And then the other no debt with 3 votes was a 6.2, and that would get us at 89%.
Great.
And it was very helpful to have the worksheets and the grids, and I just think it was a good collaboration at our table.
Great, thank you. And our green spokesperson.
Okay, being the green group standing for money, what this is all about, right? I think everybody's already touched most of our reasonings too. The pre-funding, we kind of preferred some combination of pre-funding and debt. The pre-funding, the advantages, because we're using today's dollar to try to build equity and build up our stash. It's more responsible, seems to eliminate or mitigate anyway the spikes in the increases. The debt, we like that one mostly because a couple of reasons. It spreads the cost between the generations, as was stated earlier. And again, it helps with the spikes and balances the funding sources. Okay, we did right off the bat, and it looks like everybody else did too, 1, 2, and 3, we figured there's not enough progress made there, so it's kind of a futile effort. And let's see, liked using, the computer did work out good for our group. And defers issued at 2080. Can you help me with that?
Yeah, we were thinking that, but dragged me into this. We were thinking with the deferred issue that if we were going with options 1, 2, and 3, that just defers this whole issue to the future generations, and it's just not a reasonable approach.
Great.
So for our choices, it looks like we were going for pre-funding and debt almost all the way through it, with 4.4, 5.4, and 6.4. And that's about it. We didn't have a majority on any one of them. I mean, didn't have all of us agree on every one of them, any one of them. But that's how we landed.
Great, thank you. So, a question for the group. You have the option now to vote again. Now that you've heard from all of the table groups, is there a general sense that that would be helpful? Perhaps there's something you hadn't thought of in your table group now that you've heard from other table groups that it would be helpful to vote again. Pardon?
I think we're all pretty close, actually.
So are you all comfortable with not voting again and keeping the voting that you currently have, or would anyone like to vote again? Yes.
All of these involve pre-funding and debt, mostly. So they're all relatively similar moving forwards in analyzing these. Did we want to have one or two in there that were different enough to provide more contrast as we move forward? And that's partly a question for the district staff. Will that help the whole process?
I don't know if I have a good answer for that, but that might be something we may consider when we move to the market research. That might be a good question for Godby, because they do develop questions when they do make the phone calls or the text message or email survey. And so some of those questions as far as, pre-funding or not pre-funding, debt or no debt, those could be questions that we do ask in the market research phase. So as far as changing your vote just to kind of mix it up, I don't know if that's necessarily needed, but we can maybe include some of that in the market research questionnaire.
So I believe that the alternatives that have the primary votes are what will be coming back to you at the meeting on March 19th. And the desire is to narrow that down to your top two or three. So that would be the work of our next meeting. So do we have anything else that you would like to say about the next meeting as far as the options, or is that?
I think I'm comfortable if, it looks like there is a spread, even though there's the majority are pre-funding with debt. I think, the spread is nice. If we can get narrow down to 4 tonight, I think at the next meeting, we could have some further discussions to narrow that down even more. And we will have Godby here at the next meeting to maybe answer some of those questions, and that maybe will help with the refinement. And if we do feel like there's one that maybe doesn't have debt, like I see 5.2? Pre-funding, no debt. There's some dots there. It's okay if we move that forward to the next meeting. Just be nice for market research purposes to get it down to 3 at the next meeting, 2 to 3.
I think we can accomplish that. If there's one of these, the outliers in, in the first series or something that you want to use some data for illustrative purposes or for that market research purpose, I think that's fine.
So a question for the group.
Laura, I think Julie has a comment.
I just
Oh,
was
yes.
wondering if staff were to say, okay, here's the chart we were given, here's the 4 options we're going to start researching, what would they be?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, I mean, if you've got some that are so close, it looks like the 0.4s are pretty solid for 4, 5, and 6. There's quite a few, dots on 7.4. There's quite a few dots on 5.2. There's a few on 6.2. Okay, y'all need to, do we need to narrow it down to 4 tonight, or are y'all going to take this information and y'all are going to narrow it down to 4 or 5?
I don't believe the staff is narrowing it down, but what I think a question we would have for you all is there are a couple of options. There's one that has 2 dots, another that has 1 dot. Are you okay, given how everyone else has voted, with our eliminating that option and bringing the ones that have the primary number of dots back to the group? So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. So it would just be the 2 that have, the one that has 2 dots and the one that has 1 dot.
Which would be 4.2, pre-funding no debt with 59% completion, and 5.3, no pre-funding with debt, 72% completion.
Perhaps the easiest thing would be to give you 4 more dots and knowing what you know now from hearing from all the tables, is come put dots next to your top 4, and then that way you can each vote, and we'll see whether some of these are eliminated as part of that process. So your table group facilitators have dots for you, and so why don't you take them? And if you only think the district should look at 2 alternatives or 3 alternatives, just use 2 or 3 dots. You don't need to use all 4. Has everyone voted? So the nice thing about dots is you can see the visual. And so it looks like there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that have the predominant number of dots. So I would turn to Missy and ask her, are those the ones that you would like to bring back to the next meeting?
Yeah, I think that seems like a great number for us to do some more research, and we can provide more detailed information to the CAC. It's a little bit easier to provide more detailed information for 5 alternatives versus 21. So we can do some more homework and provide you with some additional information, which will hopefully help you at the next meeting.
So those would be the ones that would be researched further, bring back more information. Then you'll have the opportunity at the next meeting to look at narrowing that down to your top 2 or 3. Well, great. How about heading back to our chairs over there? You can take all of the materials that you had home with you, so bring them with you, and then we will move into closing the meeting.
At this time, we'll open public comment for any of those in attendance that'd like to speak on the agenda or non-agenda items. Seeing no comments, I'll close that at 8:36. Laura, could you lead us in a short review of the agenda topics for March 19?
Yes, and you can see what we're going to be doing on the back of your placemat, as we affectionately call it. But the primary purpose for the next meeting then would be to revisit the 5 alternatives that you've identified and narrow down to the top 2 or 3 that would go for research. So that would be the primary purpose of the next meeting, and that will be held on March 19th at our same time. So given that, let's go around and just hear from everyone. What are you taking away from tonight from all our CAC members? And we'll let Jenna go last, and then she will close us out. So how about if we start with Ray? We'll just go around the table that way, and you'll know who's next.
Well, for me, it's just an interesting process, and I'm happy to be part of it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Kimberly. I just love this exercise. I thought this was fabulous. Just kudos to everybody for doing their homework, coming prepared, and really bringing some thoughtful insight into their opinion, into their position, and sharing that with the group. And I think it was just excellent collaboration. Thank you.
Well, we enjoyed the group discussion and come up with the conclusion, which looks like we picked about similar alternatives that everybody else picked. So hopefully that'll be included in the choices that we make in the future. Thank you.
Certainly a productive discussion and a very interesting process. Thank you.
It was interesting to recognize the way that the groups were broken up. It appeared that you try to get some diversity by the types of CAC members. And I think that helped confirm the fact that how the groups actually came together a lot more consistently in our final voting there. That was very interesting to me. I'd like to point out that I really appreciated the staff member and the consultant. I think they helped answer a lot of questions, explain some things to us, and that really helped I believe it really helped our thought process as we went through that. So it was a very good, that was probably the best exercise we've done so far as I was concerned.
I think the thing that I take away from this is that everybody was so eager to speak, and everybody spoke their mind, and everybody had a different opinion. And so many times you get groups together like this, and there's going to be people that take charge, and there's going to be some that sit in the back and really don't say a lot. But it sounded like everybody was putting their 2 cents in, and if it's going to work, it's a master undertaking, and it's going to take everybody's opinion and not just 1 or 2. So that's what I take away.
I thought it was a very good discussion. There was a lot of material, very well presented, that enabled us to have a really good, meaningful discussion and come to a understanding of what their options are.
I got to say, I had some doubts as to how easy it was going to be to come to a consensus on this, but I think our group worked very well, and we answered each other's questions, and I thought it was pretty easy to come to a conclusion.
I want to reiterate Richard's comment about staff. We had a lot of questions and that we felt we needed to get answered before we got too far into actually looking at the charts and looking at the various options, and that was, in that small group setting, it was really helpful to get real straight answers. And then if there was a question, and then it was like, I don't know the answer, I'll find out the answer. So that was really appreciated. So, and again, it was everybody had an opportunity to talk, and everybody in our group did talk. And again, it was a fascinating process and a lot of and kind of fun for a Tuesday night in the rain.
I really appreciated all the visuals tonight. Really brings clarity and helps you understand a bit of it. And I know that's all due to the homework that the Water District is doing. I really appreciate that.
Well, it's all come together a lot for me. I've come to learn a lot in the last year, and I'm looking forward to it. I appreciate all that your staff has done to educate us on what's going on. It's nice to have a vote and a say of it.
Thanks again to everybody. The groupthink experiment with the dots is always super fascinating, and I'd love to try to predict ahead of time sort of where everybody would land. And I can tell you, I didn't get all the predictions right. So, thanks for forcing me to consider some things that I hadn't considered coming before the meeting. So, thanks to you all. With that, we will close the meeting. It is 8:42. Drive safe home.